Hello everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be a full-on review of Superman and Lois Season 2. Now there will be spoilers within this review, so just beware when going into this overall video. Now you can check out my previous coverage of the show within the channel, including reviews of the first season, and I'll leave some links within the description. So just to recap on the previous events of last season, after defeating his brother Tal-Rao, who also tried to take over Smallville under the guise of Morgan Edge, Clark went about bringing back some sense of normalcy within Smallville. We see that Lois buys half of the Gazette with Chrissy in order to keep it active. Sam Lane had stepped down from the DOD, and in a climatic scene we saw John's daughter Natalie emerging from her alternate future to this current timeline in order to be reunited with her father. Now in terms of this second season, we had various arcs, starting off with Superman suffering from certain visions and nightmares, which would eventually bring him into contact with a classic version of the supervillain Bizarro. Later on throughout the season, we learn that Bizarro is indeed a doppelganger of Superman from an alternate world, known as the Inverse world or the Inverse universe. We later on learn that Bizarro is trying to stop a woman known as Ali taking over his world. Now this alternate version of Ali plans to merge her universe with the current Earth, and this includes merging with her counterpart, who in the current Earth is also a cult leader who has taken in Lois's sister Lucy. We also see the continued progression of Jordan's powers as both Sam and Clark train him to gain better control of them. Jonathan continues to lament his lack of powers and ends up taking a steroidal substance in order to advance further within the college football team. We see Lana has become mayor of Smallville, but her world is rocked when she learns that husband Carl has had a previous affair. Now after a very strong first season, I'd say that this season overall for the most part has been on the same par and level of the first year, providing a very compelling story with enough twists and turns to keep it invigorating throughout most of the season. I think we had a very strong start in the early episodes in terms of the Bizarro twist, where once again they used the same bait and switch as what we got with the first season, where you remember we all thought that Lex Luthor was going to be the main villain, and it actually turned out that this was indeed John Irons from an alternate future. Well, this time we thought that Doomsday was going to be introduced as the main villain, especially in the opening episodes where we saw the antagonists appear in that classic containment suit that we remember so much from the original comic book source material. But this turned out to be Bizarro, which I think overall was the right decision, as it's far too early at this stage to be bringing in Doomsday. And we could also argue that the villain has been a bit overused in terms of recent Superman live-action stories. Now the Inverse World arc consisted really of 2/3 of the season and was interesting enough, especially when we saw continued alternate versions of the established characters. We had a very expansive and crazy episode as we saw Superman fly into the Inverse world, and we saw how different that world was as it was completely submerged by the red sunlight. One of the key components was seeing a much more villainous Jonathan, and he would come over to the main planet and do battle with our main heroes. I also liked the fact that they very much dialed down on the complacency and whining of Jonathan and Jordan from season 1. I feel that they did far more of these characters this time around, especially with Jordan, in terms of the development of his powers, and it will be very interesting to see how much they further his abilities in season 3, and also if we start to see Jonathan develop powers of his own. Now in terms of the performances, I think all of the actors continued their good form from the first year. I still maintain that Tyler Hoechlin is a strong Superman interpretation, and really, if we think about it, this is the best live action version of the character that we've had since the immortal Christopher Reeve. Elizabeth Tullett continues to be great as Lois, and she still has a very good positive rapport with Clark. I'm very glad that they still retain that positive working collaboration between the two, as it would be very cliche to have them constantly arguing and trying to undermine one another. That was one of the biggest fears when going into this show originally, so I'm very glad that they continue to have Clark and Lois as very much of a good partnership. Now there were some issues I think within this season. I was slightly disappointed that Bizarro wasn't that much of a substantial villain. He was much more of a stepping stone to the overall Ali storyline, who herself was an interpretation of another classic Superman villain known as Parasite. I just wish we kind of had a bit more of an impression of Bizarro, as I think there's a lot of potential in him as a villain that hasn't really been utilised yet in any interpretation that we've seen in terms of live action or animation. Now the Ali storyline itself, whilst good, perhaps took up too much of the season, and I think it did drag out after a while, and it did lose a certain momentum towards the last batch of episodes, which I think took some urgency away from the story. Now on the one hand, I think we could have done with maybe 2 episodes in the Inverse world, because when we look at the episode, whilst it was jam-packed full of incident, some elements were a bit rushed, and I think they could have really developed it a bit more over 2 episodes. I also feel that Lana's arc in terms of her becoming mayor and the affair with Carl really felt a bit distant and less important in the grander scheme of things. I think it was a good move in her eventually learning Clark's identity, because that's one way in that you can keep her far more involved in the more prominent stories within the future of this show. I don't think John was quite as involved or as compelling a character as what he was within the first season. And also when we talk about Ali as a villain, I don't think she was quite as impressionable as what Tara Rowe was within season 1. She kind of drifted in and out of the season, especially in the second half and to be honest, I think she was far more compelling when we were trying to deal with her as a cult leader influencing Lois's sister Lucy. But despite all of this, there was plenty of good qualities about this show, enough to override some of the flaws in terms of the storytelling. We then talk about the finale episode, which was very action-packed. There was plenty of stakes and peril as we saw Ali trying to complete the merging of the universes. But I think in many ways it was a bit rushed. There were too many moving parts as we were focusing on all of the separate characters coming under the effects of the universe merging together. And the problem with this is that we were focusing on so many different fights and battles, but we kept cutting away to other characters. So all of these encounters didn't really have a lasting impact in terms of the excitement and the tension that they were trying to build. So overall, in terms of the episode, after many attempts from everybody to try and stop the merging, Superman regains his powers when he travels to the sun with Tara-Rail to re-energize himself. And we did get a very good sequence where we saw him flying through the streets of Smallville and all over the earth, powered up once again, and then he defeats Ali to end the overall crisis. So we followed on from there, we wrapped up all of the crisis, everything was tied up very quickly. We saw that Lois telling Chrissy about Clark's identity, which is something I didn't agree with at all, as I felt was really unnecessary. Now, I can understand Lana learning Clark's identity as what we saw a couple of episodes ago, because Lana is far more closer to both Clark and Lois, so she has far more of a personal connection to them, so it made sense that Lana would learn his identity. But there was no reason for Lois to tell Chrissy about Clark's identity, so I just worried that going ahead we're going to fall into the same trap as what we saw with The Flash, where basically half the city knows his identity. So I just thought that was a bit of an unnecessary development. We then had the latest scene where we saw John Henry being visited by John Diggle, as we all know from the Arrowverse, appearing again asking John about Bruno Mannheim from Intergang. Will this have further links to Darkseid if you remember how the character was interpreted from the Superman animated series? We'll wait and see. But again, I question the involvement of John Diggle. I don't know why they keep persisting with him having him appear in all of the various other shows. Prior to this, he's made various appearances in the likes of Supergirl and also The Flash as well. And then we ended the final scenes where we see Clark building a new fortress for himself and his family when he throws the crystal or the energy device into the sea, and then we see the new fortress forming. That's when the episode ended. So there was not really any big cliffhangers as to what we saw with the first season. And just to add, I've seen a lot of debate online regarding the fact that there were certain elements of this episode that seemed to confirm that Superman and Lois was very much on a separate Earth than all of the other Arrowverse shows. Now, I can understand this because the whole point of the recent Crisis crossover was to establish all of the Arrowverse characters on one Earth, therefore making it easier for future crossover stories. But to be honest with you, at this stage, I don't really think it matters because the Arrowverse is clearly coming to an end. We saw Supergirl reach its final season last year. Black Lightning came to an end. Both Batwoman and Legends of Tomorrow were cancelled. Naomi was cancelled in its first season. We are all assuming that The Flash will have its final season in its 9th year next year. So really, in terms of the Arrowverse, I don't think it really matters at this stage because we're very unlikely going to get another big crossover between the shows, and there's not really that much prominent characters to really involve in a big massive crossover. The Armageddon crossover that we saw in The Flash was very disappointing. So at this stage, I don't think it really matters whether the show crosses over or not with the Arrowverse, because the Arrowverse as a connected universe is really at its end now. But overall, this is a very strong season of Superman and Lois, and I think the show continues to go from strength to strength. So if I had to give an overall score for this season, I would give it a 7.9 out of 10. As I said before, very close to the strength of the first season, maybe just a notch or two down because I don't think it did improve overall of the first year. and there were just a few issues in terms of the certain story arcs maybe going on for a bit longer than what they should have done, and certain characters felt a bit distant from the main storyline. But despite all of this, Superman and Lois still remains a very significant entry in terms of the superhero genre and entertainment. So those are my overall thoughts and feelings and review of Superman and Lois Season 2. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If there are any other superhero shows that you'd like to see me review, then you can check out 3, 2, 1, a playlist within my channel, and I'll leave some links within the description, when I also cover the likes of The Flash, Supergirl, and also Batwoman as well. If you have any other shows or television series or indeed movies that you'd like to see me cover within this channel, then drop me a further suggestion within the comments and I can see if I can provide further commentary on that content for you in the future. Please also hit and like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.